Wasn't that the outro?
Yeah,
It could be. I
inverse.
could be living in reverse. I mean, they're very close together, and I looked away right as I clicked.
Maybe
So,
it's opposite day.
you dear listeners that listen so consistently, don't turn us off now, because
We
we
still have a
indeed,
whole episode.
yeah, we still
Well,
have an whole episode.
here's a question based on the Freaky Friday intro outro thing that just happened.
Yes.
Who do you think? Well, two questions
Okay.
within the podcast. Who are the two main? So me, Ray, Alexis, and Jessica Besson, who we miss, but we will see soon.
Yes.
Who do you think, if they Freaky Friday'd, would be the least likely to notice?
Hmm.
And who would be the most likely to
Gee.
notice?
I don't even know.
Freaky
I
Friday, a reference to your
don't even know.
personalities and within the bodies switch. So, for instance, if Alexis and I were to Freaky Friday,
Wouldn't
I
even
would have
notice.
Alexis's. My personality
Body.
would be inside of Alexis's body. Alexis's personality would be inside my body. I feel like
Ooh.
Alexis and Ray would be the most jarring.
Which role is which? I want to hear this. Why would it be so jarring, Brett? Not to put you right on the spot.
Well,
Alexis is like, I'm waiting.
I know.
I think Alexis would be. It would be like people would be like, "Are you okay? Like you're just like a little more chill, like a little more. I don't know.
You don't seem as angry as you usually do.
Yeah. And with Ray, it'd be like, "Are you okay?
Are you okay? You seem a bit more edgy than lately.
You seem to have some fire in your
Things
belly
seem
there.
to be bothering you that normally don't.
A little vim and vigor to the stew today.
I think maybe I'm just Ray's internal monologue, and I would be letting it out.
Ooh, yin and yang, you think?
I think.
Yeah,
I think
you're
that
just
you
Ray,
are.
no filter.
Yeah, just Ray, no filter. I think because Ray and I get up to things when two of us are together. We find
It's
saying
bad.
this is a
It's not a
front from
cancellation effect. It's a magnification effect, and I can't explain that. I can't explain that.
Well, mostly because you're a bad influence, and I can be baited into anything. So.
Ray baited. I love it. You've been Ray baited. Not rage baited. You've been Ray baited. I was in school a bit of an instigator.
You want to fight him? You know you do.
I never approached problems, even in elementary school, head on, because I would always whisper in 3 different ears to accomplish the goal, and ended up having the
puppet master.
Yeah, and I was over there going, "Can I help you, or with the erasers, or can I, help you, teacher?" It was like, yeah. So I guess
does Reed have any of that?
What's that?
Does Reed have any of that? Your son Reed?
Yeah, he's got it bad, and I'm in so much trouble because my energy level's waning and his power is waxing. So
I can definitely see him as like a coalition builder against whatever he's, just sort of charming people.
Bedtime,
Yeah. He uses our words against us. I mean, did you have any of that in you, Brett? Like who would Brett match up with? I need to know this, Alexis. What are you thinking for the Freaky Friday switch over with Brett?
And I will say, within the podcast is fun, but also outside the podcast can also be fun.
Yes. We can play different roles someday, yeah.
Yeah, I think Jessica and Brett could switch and be like could fly under the radar if they wanted to. Like they would be actively saying, I know what I'm doing here, but I think they could both fly under the radar. I don't think Ray and I could hide ourselves.
Yeah, that's an interesting combo. The Jessica and Brett, which they can both have extremely righteous indignation in a very good way, but it would fly under the radar if you did not know them well. So
I feel like they're both able to like sit in a room with ragey people and just be like, well, that's a thought. Maybe we just move past that now.
Now let's talk sensibly.
I think we do have some peacekeeper
vibes,
tendencies, but also different. The mama bear thing is very obviously that's the thing with Jessica, but I have that kind of as well.
You do. Don't mess with Brett's team, man.
Team Brett.
He comes
Come
out.
get you.
The Virgo in him comes out.
Takes all kinds of kinds, folks. It does. It does indeed.
Well, you know what else it takes all kinds of? Pesticides to keep our tomatoes
Okay.
from getting blight every summer. So
It
there you
is.
go.
It is gardening season in Kentucky, and we all kind of had a feeling. We kind of knew that was such a historically wet period in Kentucky this
And
spring.
cool, relatively cool.
Relatively cool. We had relatively cool spans. Apparently, there was a
Mhm.
warm spell that went on record, but then it got really cool and wet. And that, as far as triangles go, is a perfect quad. It's a perfect
Mhm.
disease triangle. And now that everybody's,
Mhm.
so you mentioned tomatoes, Alexis. Everyone's tomatoes are up. Some people have pretty good sized tomatoes now as far as
Mhm.
plants go. And yeah, they're starting to cover and shade themselves, and all of that just leads into your discussion you opened with, Alexis, with pesticides,
Yeah. First
specifically
of all,
disease
I want
controls.
to
Yeah.
say pesticides. If you're new here, this is for you. I think a lot of our listeners know this. Pesticide is not a bad word. It also includes organic things.
Yeah.
Organic things are considered a pesticide. So we're not saying, we're not flirting with either side of the fence here. We're just calling it one big thing. I just want to make sure everybody
Well,
knows
yeah, I
we are
mean, it
friends
just
of organic and conventional. I just feel like sometimes the word
etymologically,
pesticide could be ugly.
I mean,
pesticide carries some cultural weight, some cultural baggage
yeah.
Yes.
now.
Yes.
Pesticide free, anti-pesticide, whatever. And I think that there's some definitely valid critiques and concerns to have
Sure.
about prevalence of pesticide. But I mean, if you're just breaking it down, it's just a pest, and you want to icide it. Killing a person is
Mhm.
homicide. Killing a pest is pesticide.
I mean, in
You
So I
this,
guess if
yeah.
you are
you
a
use
total pacifist, like at a very
yeah.
like a Buddhist like core
Yes.
self, maybe you might have some objections to pesticides, but conceptually, most people are fine to have the stink bug die rather than ruin their tomato, or have the cucumber beetle die rather than give the bacterial wilt to their cucumbers.
Mhm.
We're
Which
getting a lot of questions on all. We're going to get a lot of questions on all those things. But yeah, this wet year has, I mean, it's been on our minds as far as, and again, pesticide is never our first line of defense. We've talked a lot about on the show integrated pest management. It's part of an overall control strategy to manage damage to an acceptable level. Let's just put it that way. So, with
Mhm.
that being said, we talk about pesticides, but that's part of a larger control strategy. It's not stage one. It may be state consideration or stage 3 or 4. But with
Mhm.
Yeah,
this wet
you
year, I
might
mean,
go
it's a concern. Yeah,
back to
go ahead.
previous IPM episodes
Mhm.
that we've done. I think you all might have already just mentioned that,
Cultural
but
controls, stuff like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
for
and,
sure.
and
I,
and so like some quick examples of what that would be. If
Um,
well,
you're going to be
look,
pruning, or if you're going to be doing any kind of like that kind of
mhm.
intervention, clean your tools in between uses or in between areas where there's
Yeah.
problems.
Or
Or
spacing of tomatoes to allow greater airflow and light penetration down into them. And on that
mhm.
same line of thought, if you have a peach tree that you're doing correct pruning that lets light get down into the interior canopy and it dries the foliage quicker and therefore reduces disease pressure. All of those are things that do not involve pesticides, but in the strictest sense, I mean, if we're talking about pesticides, sunlight is a pesticide because it helps destroy pathogens. So we could go down
Uh-huh.
that hole, but we're doing kind of cultural practices you guys just mentioned. And there's lots of those, and that's usually what I think about first is things like variety selection and cultural practices before I ever think personally and professionally before I think about pesticides. And in
Mhm.
these wet years, we know that we're going to have what, guys? I mean, what's cropping up now?
Disease, powdery
Yeah,
mildew, botrytis, blight,
yes. Lawn, landscape,
all of
and
them.
gardens and
Mhm.
flowers, you name it. This,
trees.
yeah, trees,
Yeah.
lots of
I
anthracnose cause.
I saw uh, it was Annie, my wife Annie. I don't know if it's that she focuses on the positive. I don't know what, but she tends not to notice like really obvious disease things or like that type of stuff. She's more focused on the flower than the.
Uh-huh.
But she noticed and pointed out. I think it was like a maple anthracnose that
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
on like silver maples, things that are normally like
Mhm.
almost bulletproof, at least in our
Yeah.
neighborhood. and it was this black, like malformation, gross
Mm-hmm.
fungal
Tar
body
spot.
on the fungal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
on the
mostly.
leaves of the maple trees.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, that is an indication of just how wet and disease friendly our early year,
Mhm.
first half of the year has been.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess that's one thing we can talk about. I mean, we tend to gloss over it. We've never, don't think, explicitly talked about it. And we don't want to talk about it a lot here. But we talk a lot about the disease triangle that informs all of our decisions, and that's, you've got a host that's susceptible and to some level, and disease pressure, then the environment, and there's a lot of different ways you can look at that. But all that being said, is the conditions have been just right on the disease triangle, at least early on, for early heavy disease development. And now we're dealing with the fallout of that, as Brett said, on trees. Lots of maple calls this year, and we're going to get that on gardens because uh, it's just been really good conditions for that early disease, and it's starting to show now. People are starting
Mhm.
to notice that.
So one
So,
thing, oh,
yeah, well, I was gonna say like, questions that start to come in, I think as things start to heat up.
Yeah.
When you say fallout, I think some of that is because the amount of time since infection occurred, and
Mm-hmm.
so then we're getting that, but also, um, because the heat will put stress on the plant, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we know, like, actually, even though we have all these warm weather plants, tomatoes, we always think, oh, it's hot weather, but they don't really like it much above, like, what, 80 to 85. I
Yeah,
mean, if it's
lots of
hotter
garden
than
plants
that, then
don't.
they're,
Yeah.
even though they don't like the cold either, they're like me, they're just like middle of the road type of plants.
We
But
use big words like physiological, like,
Mhm.
issues, tomato white flecking, or just heavy tissue callousing of the tomato if it gets too hot and you don't have good
Mhm.
shoulder coverage, good vine coverage
Mhm.
of the tomato. But on either end, that affects a lot of crops, and I always worry about the heat because we've seen extended, um, not warm spells, but extended heat spells here in Kentucky the last few years. It seems like we'll get a week or two of that. And if it happens during something like green beans, you'll have blossom abortion. That'll also happen on things like cucumbers and pumpkins, depending on the variety. Some varieties are a little bit better about it. But yeah, Alexis, that's a great point. I mean, we're talking about diseases now, but I mean,
well,
let's
I
zoom
think
out a little
Well,
bit. We're talking about
but
weather.
I thought part of what you were saying, Alexis, was that those fungal spores and
mhm.
things, or even the bacterial stuff
Yeah.
might be there, but then this heat causes stress, which opens. It's
Mm-hmm.
sort of like how you ever
Susceptibility.
notice how when you're really stressed out about work or family or whatever, you tend to get sick. It's
Yeah.
Yeah,
because you're weakened. You're not as
right.
strong as you once were. I assume
Mm-hmm.
that is that kind of what you were getting at, Alexis.
Yeah,
Even on the
exactly,
disease
exactly.
side, yeah, sure.
Yeah, so
Gotcha, gotcha.
one thing that I feel like, as someone who like has a love of pathology, that it's hard to talk to people about, is that most of the time with your diseases, whether they're fungal or bacterial, or viral, when you start to notice something is wrong, it's too late to do much about it in the plant world. There's uh something that defies that logic, but that is majority of what we talk about is fungal, bacterial, viral. All of that is prevention. Some of that is in just like having healthy plants and doing all the proper pruning and all those cultural things we talk about. But some of that is different than when we talk about insects. It is that you have to basically pre-treat. You have to protect them. You have to put on like a protective barrier to prevent the infection from happening. And so that's really hard for people who have a beautiful garden. They said, oh, it was beautiful all spring, and then it gets in the 80s and up there, and the plant starts to get a little bit more stressed out. We start to see these signs and these symptoms come out from this earlier infection, and you want to do something about it right now. And the answer often, not always, but often, is there's not much you can do other than just help that plant stay as healthy as possible and let it limp through the season. Otherwise, you're just kind of ripping it out, and you know, so long tomato crop 2025.
Yeah, with the fungal stuff especially. it's almost like it would be almost like putting sunscreen on a sunburn. It's like
Yes.
the damage is already done.
Right.
And so part of it, I think, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, part of that means if that as you learn as a gardener or as a landscape person or a lawn person or whatever, you start to realize like, okay, yes, there are strange things. Like this was a very, very wet year, but
Mm-hmm.
Kentucky's not exactly a dry place ever. And so each year there's your tomatoes are probably going to get disease of some sort because they're not exactly the most robust and resistant to all diseases, and that you're growing them in a pretty steamy place, and steamy and sometimes cool place. So you're kind of almost planning to apply some amount of fungicide to certain plants. Is that
Yeah,
accurate?
a lot of that, I've ran into over the years, and that's a very interesting question because it all depends on, I think, scale. We've talked a lot about scale on this podcast recently, but if you're a home gardener, you can your decision making is going to be different. If you have, let's say, 10 tomato plants and you want to be as low input as possible, so you do cultural practices such as you select a cultivar that's fairly resistant to some of these common diseases and root issues, and you space them out and you put them in a windy place with lots of airflow. Now, if you're a commercial person, you are big enough to where you're probably going to pre-treat by anticipating weather patterns and disease
Mm-hmm.
movement and when the disease is typically present and stage of growth. So a homeowner may be able to get by with, on a limited scale of waiting, hoping, not spraying a whole lot of cover sprays, but that's not the decision making typically line of reasoning of a commercial producer. They're going to do what you just mentioned, Brett. They're going to do a lot of preemptive things because one of you guys made the comment earlier that usually, especially homeowner chemicals, they're more preventative rather than curative. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
slow disease progression in a lot of cases, but it won't cure what's already affected.
Mm-hmm.
And that principle is extremely important, even on a commercial scale. So, different scenarios require different decision making, and it all goes back to risk and can you tolerate losing the crop or not, and still, not be impacted too much financially. Different ways of handling the same situation, essentially, I guess. If that
Mm-hmm.
makes
And
sense at
I'll,
all, my
I'll say,
rambling.
as I would consider
Rambling.
myself a somewhat serious home grower now, who maybe transitioned out of some
Mm.
research and things where the plants were supposed to stay alive, and you weren't supposed to lose them, and you're supposed to be
It's
able to know
pretty
how much came
important.
out.
Yeah.
I did, and I do actually with my trees, my bonsai trees. I actually do some fungal prevention
Do you?
sprays.
Yeah.
Um, and so maybe like some people it may be the other thing that's interesting is depends on how long into the summer you actually want to pick your tomatoes, for instance.
Yeah.
There's some
Mm-hmm.
people who they get that first flush off and they're like, you know what, after this I'm kind of
Done.
cool, let the blight take it, let the whatever happens.
Yeah.
Other people want it
We
to keep going. I think that's
we've got
a
some
look,
great
being honest with
research on that.
yourself.
Yeah, and there's some excellent research on that, even on a commercial scale, that it's no longer economically feasible on an economic scale to spray past a certain point because you have all the leaves to make all the fruit in this
Mm-hmm.
case tomatoes, where you don't need to protect it any longer because it's going to get disease and decline at a given rate. And so that juxtaposition, you stop spraying because you save money by stopping spraying, and you don't have to worry about harvest restrictions and things like that. But yeah, that's a great point, Brett.
There's something
Well,
similar in flowers because a lot of flowers, zinnias are a great example. If you've ever grown a zinnia and anywhere in the South, you've gotten powdery mildew on them, I can just
Every
guarantee
year,
it.
every
And
year.
but they're so fast,
Yeah.
and the first few flushes of them, just because the plant is not tired, um, are always the best, anyways. That we do successions of those, and so if you're got the market for them and all of that stuff we talk about all the time, you can sow those every 4 weeks, and so then as one flush is going out, and then you never bother to spray them because you've got fresh coming
Oh,
on, they're going to be higher quality regardless, and then you're pulling out those other things, and so that's one way. And with flowers, especially because you've got pollinators visiting them, and
Yeah.
granted, fungicides are not something that's going to affect your pollinators because they are going after fungal bodies. That is one thing that people, I think, sometimes forget, that that's what happens. But you don't have to worry about that, and just no spray when you're dealing with flowers is
The
always
similar
ideal.
concept applies to, like, even vegetable crops, Alexis. One that comes to
Squash.
mind would be, what's that? Squash.
I would
Yes,
say
you
like
do
cucurbits in general, most
yes,
of the
yeah.
time. Squash, though,
Is that
yeah.
kinda similar to what you're saying on the cut flower,
Mhm.
where you're trying to avoid squash vine borer specifically,
Yeah.
is you do
Yeah.
succession plantings? Because
Mhm.
after a certain point, those late plantings aren't gonna get hit nearly as hard by, but yeah,
Mhm.
that when
Mhm.
you said that, that's interesting. I didn't realize that on the zinnias, that's how growers, on a bigger scale grew those. That's
Mhm.
pretty cool that
Yeah.
that's what you're doing. You're just accepting that loss. But one of my zinnia beds right now, we just do it here at home, a pretty good sized bed. Those has some kinda leaf. I've not really looked at it. Jennifer said she noticed it, but some kinda leaf spot. I'll have to consult with you later on
Yeah.
that. It looks
Anthracnose, it's
I don't
right
know if it's
along.
anthracnose or what, yeah, but,
That's yep, yep, and
plants
some
that usually don't
plants.
get that, yeah.
Yeah, some plants get it, but grow out of it. So sometimes that anthracnose for in zinnias I see every year. A lot of time it'll affect the older leaves, and the newer
Mhm,
leaves it won't affect because of the temperature. So going back to
yeah,
that triangle we talk about. So it has to be the right environment, the right host, and the pathogen. So in this case, with the zinnia, early in the season, it's a little bit cooler when they're little. You've got the host, you've got good environment, good temps, and you've got the disease present.
mhm,
Then it warms up and we lose that environment. And so basically, that anthracnose, it's still there, but it's essentially dormant
mhm.
in a lot of cases. And so it just waits. The plant grows, the plant does fine. And then if it cools down again and that plant's still in, you get the environment piece back to your triangle, right? And
That
then
is,
it launches off.
that's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is knowing that it's anthracnose, and wisdom is knowing that you're not typically gonna have to treat for it because the plant's gonna outgrow it and have no tremendous impact, so yeah,
Right, right. It's just
cool.
something's gonna come up, whether it's the environment or the host change or whatever that is. And I think that's one thing about like disease that it shocked me when I learned it, was that a lot of diseases, and granted, we're talking specifically about the ones we see in, Kentucky and this general area, at basically any state that touches Kentucky, I would feel confident in saying this, but most of them thrive in those lower temps, like just like the tomatoes,
Mhm,
right? Like it makes
yeah,
sense for the pest to thrive at the same temperatures that the host thrives on, right? And so they shut down when it gets above about 80 degrees, and they have to have the right humidity. They have to have all the right things too. And so, often you can just, again, back to that wisdom part of it. If I know it's going to get hot, I'm not going to bother treating something because I know it's going to shut down. And that's where it can be hard. And that's where, going to your local extension office, taking them a sample, knowing exactly what you're dealing with is so important, and not just like, oh, it's a spot. It's probably, fungal. Well, bacteria acts very different than fungus acts, and virus acts very different than those two
mhm.
acts. So really knowing what you're dealing with is what's important to whether or not you're going to treat and how you're going to treat it.
Well, and that's a common thing, because and one of you guys said it just a few minutes ago. You said, by the time you see it, it may be too late to treat, this year or on this planting. And, things
Mhm.
like a lot of our floral crops, and especially like home gardens, or even commercial plantings, they're annuals, right? So the first
Mhm.
question I want to do is, yes, you want to identify the pathogen, but the reason I want to do that is, how persistent is it going to be for following
Yeah.
crops? So that's a big consideration. Is it soil borne on water splash, or is it some other way? And how persistent is it going to be? Is it going to be is it going to be like rhizoctonium or pythium that's going
Mhm.
to be three to
Yeah,
five
how
years?
does it spread? Yeah, that's a big
Yeah,
one,
like
especially like virus. I
yeah. Oh,
mean, if
viruses
it's
like,
spread
yeah,
in
rosette.
underground nematodes, like,
This is
what are you doing?
we're not so much caring about. I mean, we care about this year's crop when someone comes into our offices. We try to help with as much as possible about that. But the more valuable information is, how is that going to impact your planting next year? Are you going to have to
Mhm.
rotate into a different class of plants? And that's a big consideration when we
Mhm.
take all of these disease causes, because we're looking at this year, but we're also looking down the road oftentimes, and make our decisions based on that. This real important concept. It's not just this year, but following years.
Well, I have an example from my bonsai that kind of gives it is an example of what both of you all were just talking about. So, as a perennial, ideally, as long as it survives, a perennial crop,
Long perennial, yeah.
there will be, like on a pine tree, for instance, there's going to be needles from last year on the tree as needles from this year come out. And
Mhm.
so I have trees that got some needle cast issues last year, and I was able to stop the spread of that, but they're pretty infected. And as the new needles emerge this year, I'm trying to protect them from, in that cool time of year, from becoming inoculated by the needles from last year. And so
Oh,
ideally next year I'll have healthy needles that didn't get inoculated. And so I'll still be vigilant, but it's an interesting, because it's almost like two crops on the same plant, basically two rounds of
yeah.
foliage on the same plant. And as Alexis pointed out, what ends up happening with a lot of those, with some of the specific ones that I have on some of these that affect these trees, is that they actually get inoculated and to a certain extent infected in the spring, but as it heats up, the fungal bodies go dormant, and then they don't show back up again until the fall. And so
Mhm.
you think that it got infected in the fall, but it actually got infected in the spring. And so you're like chasing your tail, only to realize there was this 6-week window when the needles were emerging in the spring, before those needles had hardened off, before they had formed a
Mhm.
really hard cuticle to protect them from those fungal things. If you treat during there and prevent the spread, then that's kind of your window to not
Yeah.
have ugly needles a year and a half from now, which is kind of crazy, a crazy
Mhm.
longer term disease cycle thing to think about. But I wanted to, I think when I at the home garden scale, one of the things that I got a little bit lost on, or a little bit overwhelmed with, I guess, was, okay, so I've gone through all my cultural practices, I've done all the things that I can, and I'm just coming to terms with the fact that I live in humid Kentucky with some crazy cool springs sometimes. And I'm going to have to spray in the case of what I'm doing, the density that I'm at, etc.
Mhm.
So for a while there, I bought the like pre-made, like the almost like
In a
kitchen
spray
cleaner
bottle.
type spray bottles. The thing about those is that it's really hard to get good coverage on more than like one plant or two plants, and your hand gets tired and everything else. So I was just curious, like other options. It's also kind of expensive because you're buying a lot of water in there.
Mhm.
I've kind of figured out some stuff, but I'm curious, if people come in and talk with you all, is there any kind of discussion of that small scale equipment
Sure.
up even to larger scale?
Yeah, that's one of the first questions I ask. I'll usually start with that. I mean, how many plants do you have? What's the scale of what you're spraying? And then we start to have discussions like, if you have no sprayer at all, is it something that's appropriate with a hose in mixer sprayer kind of thing? Like the classic example is the dial and spray type sprayers that have the big red knob on them. But then I start to ask about things like backpack sprayers, just some kind of sprayer that's appropriate for the number of plants that they're spraying and the height and general
Mhm.
size of those plants. Really important.
Yeah. I love me just like a little, I mean, I've got backpack sprayers, I've got like larger things, but those can be expensive. And
Mhm.
the thing I tend to go to the most often is just my little hand pump sprayer. That's like 2 gallons. I'm going to use that a lot. Ideally, this is because, a lot of the time I'm using it for like hot spots type area. Like I've seen, oh, this plant's not quite looking right. I'm going to make sure I'm protecting it and everybody around it so that it's not, nothing is spreading, or just the amount of preventative I'm doing. And the beauty of that is even if you wanted to buy, um, you know, I always tell people the more for your money is going to be like a concentrate, right? It's just like when you're
Mhm.
buying, apple juice. If you buy an apple juice concentrate and mix it up yourself versus you buying a thing of juice, right? You're gonna get more. But like you said, it can be expensive if you're new to gardening, or you're just not sure if you want your tomatoes to last all season or whatever that's like, and you want to stick with buying the small amount of pre-made. Maybe you're really bad at math. I also get that. Sometimes I'm just like, I just want the pre-made and I'm supposed to know how to do all this stuff.
And
But
sometimes the pre-made may be the best if you have one rose bush or
yeah,
just like
or you just can't find it, like
yeah.
we talk about where in areas of Kentucky, there's areas in Kentucky where the only place to buy a pesticide is going to be at like the Dollar General, right? And
Mhm.
that's no fault of anybody's, but that's just what's available, and so you've got to go with that. So anyways, even if you're just buying that, I do agree with Brett. For most of your, a lot of your pesticides, fungicides, even your insecticides, especially at the homeowner level, because of what that active ingredient is, the most important thing you could do is get good coverage. For
Yeah.
a lot of them, it's like until you get drips coming off the leaf. Um, Always read the directions. The label is the law. Don't say that. I feel like Rick Besson will haunt my dreams. But
It's gotta
always
be in
follow the
there.
label. But usually coverage is the best. And with fungicides,
Yeah.
especially, remember that barrier. If you miss a spot with your sunscreen, you're gonna get sunburned. And so you need to create that good even barrier. And so buying that small pump spray that you can wash and reuse as many times as you want, if you take care of it, um, is just going to help you get more coverage. So even if you dump your like little spray bottle into that thing that has a finer mist, you can spray more at one time because you're just pumping it with your hand occasionally. That is a really big upgrade, even if you're still
Yeah.
using the same at home products. So um, that would be, you'll see a huge difference with how effective you are.
And
Yeah,
I found
you could adjust the spray tip to give you
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
a bigger versus a finer mist depending on what
Mhm.
you're doing. But I think sometimes like your hand gets tired when you're squeezing the spray
Yeah.
bottle, like the manual spray bottle, and you're like, that's good enough. And honestly, if you don't get great coverage, you might as well have almost not even applied it at all,
Yeah. It's just
depending
a
on what it
waste
is
of time
that
and
you're
money.
applying. Another thing I would say is if you do decide to go the route of the concentrates,
Mhm.
and you do decide to mix your own, do not operate by the logic that my dad used to operate on, which was the more if a tablespoon is good, then a quarter cup is going to really knock that stuff back. That may be the case with servings of vegetables when you're eating at dinner time, and
Peaches, we're
an
looking
extra
at
little
you.
bit might be
Or
good. But with
cake.
pesticides, there's some very, very smart people who have done some very, very hard math and chemistry to formulate and figure and test, and they recommend the dose that they recommend because that's how it's effective, and that's how it's safe for people and plants and
Mhm.
animals, and that's how it's safe for the plant. Like, you can actually end up harming or killing your plant if you over apply certain
Right.
pesticides in the process. So
And
follow
like,
the labels are written, and the label is the
right.
law. Follow the label instructions. They have very good, very clear instructions about what size, if you're doing for what type of crop you're doing it for,
Mhm.
and just follow that. And I would agree with you. I think that 1 to 2 gallon sprayer is like the sweet spot for most,
Mhm.
Mhm.
like, and even at like a decent scale when you're managing
Yeah.
stuff more on a, like you said, a spot spray, or you're kind of just doing as needed. Sometimes it's just faster, even if you have to do 2 or 3 rounds
Yep.
of the 2 gallon. It's still faster
For,
and
like,
less.
space? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, if you're in a tight garden space, I mean, and, like, for me, if I'm in the high tunnel, I can do, a full row in my high tunnel, and I have to fill up my little 2-gallon sprayer twice, but I don't have this heavy backpack on when it's either really hot or really cold, because I can never do it on a day that makes makes sense weather-wise. But also it's tight in there. And so, this heavy thing, I'm lugging it around. I'd rather just have this small thing that I can whip that out, and like you said, it's faster. From the label perspective, I can feel some of you being rebels and you're like, I mean, that's great. And yeah, but I've done this before. I'm not going to burn my plant. The other thing is, it just might not work. So, right, these are chemical interactions. And so if it says it takes a whole gallon of water per 1 tablespoon of pesticide and you put more, then that stuff might just be floating around and is not used. Like, and so you're just wasting it. So I can feel some of you rebels going, well, but no, really, like it might not actually work because you've not mixed it with enough stuff. It's like your powdered cheese in your macaroni and cheese box. If you don't put the right amount of
I
water
don't
with it,
know.
you get
More is
paste.
more in
Six packs
mac
in
and
one
cheese.
serving of my.
Yeah.
I don't want to paste. I want the cheese to coat all of my noodles. Okay, so I have to put the right amount of water per powdered cheese.
That is a very
we're talking about
powerful
water. I
metaphor.
thought we were talking about cheese. I was like, more cheese is better, though. That's not a good
No, I'm
example.
talking powdered cheese to
Powdered cheese in
powdered cheese to water ratio, and
yeah.
And I know we're talking about diseases, but I mean, if we look at other horticulture enterprises such as like turf management, I know I'm saying the T word, turf.
it's okay.
We talked some about that on the podcast, but there's just straight up some selective plant management herbicides there that if you go off dosage and mix too much, you'll just straight kill both the intended target and like the turf.
Ooh, do you
So
remember
yeah,
the pine tree 2,4-D thing of like the
the strombulin class of
2010s?
chemicals. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they sprayed for broadleaf sprayed a broadleaf herbicide and a lot of turf, and
It
when
killed
the temps were
trees.
too high, and
Yeah.
it smoked trees because it all what's the word I'm looking for when it like evaporates off?
Volatilized.
It volatilized. It was a 2,4-D that volatilized,
Oh
and it just
wow!
smoked. I mean, there
Up
were
in
companies getting sued left and right
Oh,
for
yeah.
stuff.
what kind
Yeah,
of
we had a
what
bunch
kind
of
of pine
people.
trees?
There
Well, it
was
was
a
all trees, but like white pines seem to get hit. I mean, they're white
yeah.
pines, but like
Wow.
white
There's
pines got
multiple
smoked.
issues. Yeah.
Any
Huh.
tree that was like had turf sprayed relatively below
In and
it got
around it.
smoked by 2,4-D.
I mean,
Wow.
it's just really important. I mean, because you're going to find stuff like this on the labels. You're going to find, first thing I look for, I mean, you want to read the entire label. And most labels, I have to say, have gotten better over time, especially
Mhm.
for homeowners. All the information is important. The most important information is highlighted just a little bit more on most of the major brands. And I'm very glad of that trend. That's gotten better, I think, over time. But look for things like harvest intervals and based on the specific crop. You can't just look at the harvest interval on a disease control for green beans and apply that to cucumbers, even though cucumber and green beans are both on there. They may have different harvest restrictions. Not only that, but the
Mm.
maximum number of applications per season, total amount of active ingredient, all of that stuff is just eminently important when we're talking about disease control or otherwise. As Alexis said, the label kind of is the law. You absolutely have to go by that. And it's been crafted over time. Lots of research dollars have went into that. Uh, to formulate, a product that is has tested out to be safe. So just always
Yeah,
keep
and
that in mind.
even if we have some folks who are skeptical of some of the safety and other recommendations that come out from chemical companies and from the EPA and all that kind of stuff, even putting that aside, I don't care. Even the really quote unquote innocuous stuff,
Mhm.
following the label is the best way to do that because they have. I mean, it's not just the chemists and agronomists that look over this stuff. Their lawyers look over it too, and they're making sure that this is the safest way possible that you can apply this stuff. And so I
Mhm.
think, one thing I just wanted to talk about before we wrap up was that if you are in more of the large garden, moving into some commercial or larger scale or anything like that, there are trainings available from offered through the extension service for
Mhm.
certified pesticide applicators. And I won't talk too much about that because I haven't had a need to, but I was once a certified pesticide applicator back when I was applying pesticides at a scale other than tiny trees. And one of the interesting things I still remember this from that, and I sing it. I don't really sing it to myself, but it's a cute image to think of me singing it to myself. Is the Wales order of mixing acronym? Do you all
Mm.
do you all remember this? That I'm not going to sing. I'm just going to that water goes in first. Water and wettable powders and water dispersible granules, and then A is agitation. So trying to maintain movement and agitation even in the tank in some way, if that's manually with by kind of moving it around or whatever. L's is your liquid flowables, and yeah, some other stuff with there. E are your emulsifiable concentrates. And then S are your solutions or soluble liquids. And I think it's just what that means is like that's the order in which you're mixing stuff in the tank. And that's an example of something I learned through the certified pesticide applicator training many moons ago. And that's like there's just basic chemistry there that you don't want to add your very, very concentrated stuff and then add water to that, because as those first few drops of water hit that, it just becomes like really powerful and potentially volatilizes right in your face. But it's just there is some method to the madness there. When do those typically happen? What does that typically look like? Is there a cost? I know you all have done these trainings.
In most counties, the majority of those will happen in very early spring, late winter, very early spring, because as a commercial applicator, that allows you to buy restricted use chemicals for use only on your own operation, or you can trade for some services. There's some allowances there, but most of those trainings for producers happen in the springtime of the year. So if you're curious about those trainings, to get more information on that, call the offices beginning, I would say, in November or December, so that you can kind of get a schedule of those trainings coming up. And for most offices, there are no charges that I know of for the private pesticide applicator license. Now, when you get into the commercial license, those involve testing and study materials, and those are administered directly through the Kentucky Department of Ag. So there's some fees associated with those. But on the private pesticide applicator training program that the extension office administers, there are no fees typically associated with those. And I think those are still good for 3 years once you're certified through a local county program. That certification lasts for 3 calendar years.
Yeah, I have a little bit of, I would say, almost like a non-U.S. viewpoint or sensibility or sensitivity around pesticide stuff. Like, it's kind of crazy to me that I can just like order Mancozeb just to my house. That's kind of crazy. And like to a European, I think listening, they'd be like, what? This is wild. Like, there must be some sort of something. And so I just think like pesticides, I don't have the, anti viewpoint. I think I have a very, just like with firearms and with fire for that matter, I have a healthy respect for the power of it and the potential dangers associated with it. And so I just want people to be safe, but also use these tools that are really cool and effective and can help to manage some of these sticky things.
And you made a really good point earlier, Brett. That goes for inorganic and organic labeled products, because if you look at some of the organic labeled products, just for example, like some of the nicotine based products, you have to be very careful you have to be very careful on following the label on all products. But even the organic products, you have to be very careful to follow the label exactly, because some of those things are highly toxic and they're organic. So you always look at the label. Just don't assume because it may have an organic label that it may be safer. From any standpoint, it's not. That's why we never go off label, because some of these things they're pesticides. They're designed to dispatch things, to kill things, and always keep that in mind. I tell people that kind of jokingly, but not really. Yeah, it's the side thing, the death part of the equation. It's designed to control, pathogens or other higher order pests. Always keep that in mind with the side things, the pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, whatever.
So to leave folks on an actionable note here. So if you have issues with your plants, you can obviously call your extension office. You can go and check out some of the publications that are available from our friends in plant pathology, who are the real experts in this stuff. If you get if you get in contact with the agent and they're able to either come out for a site visit or analyze your pictures or whatever, they may tell you, this is what I think this is. They may tell you, let's send in a sample. and they'll kind of walk you through that process. We have a whole pathology lab where you can send in samples and see what, confirm that this is powdery mildew or downy mildew or whatever. And then from there, they can also help to guide you to other controls that might be a good fit. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Just
Yeah.
number one, get identified by someone that is an actual person, I would say, also, because I know sometimes those apps can be really helpful in getting it into the general maybe area of what it could be. But, there are lots of fungal things that look very similar. And without looking at them under a microscope or seeing how they like literally how the bacteria streams out of the veins of the plant, you can get that confused. So I would say I'm all for technology, but when it comes to identifying a pathogen, make sure you have a human do it for you.
Well, and the good thing about that coming to a county office, I'll give a little plug there, is that we see things seasonally in magnitude. Like if we see tar spot on a maple, or we see some disease or some insect damage, the odds are we've seen that 40 other times, and we can put that together and play the odds and get a little bit of a jump on identification and management, because the odds are that, as agents, we cover entire counties, and especially you guys that are on a state scale, you even have a broader scope than us based on a county level. That does help a lot. That gives us a real jump on trends that are happening in counties, and that overview, let that work for you. Go visit your local
You can
county office.
also, so we've had a whole episode on weather with Matt Dixon, if you've not heard that, who is with UK Ag Weather, and he has a really great app. And often on that app, when there are diseases, and it's meant for like bigger growers, but even if you have a couple apple trees in your backyard, he'll put alerts out when it's prime time for sprays. So the weather is right. We've got winds coming out of the south bringing the disease in, and so they'll post on there, hey, you need to be spraying for XYZ. And so another benefit of that really great free app that has no ads, I'm just saying.
It's a good one.
Big
It's a
plug.
good one.
Big Matt Dixon. And I think like with disease and insects both, I would go and talk to the agent. I think taking a little time to do a little research and scouting and have your best guess and be open to being wrong, but you're learning in the process too. That's definitely like it's nice to go and take it to somebody and they're like, yeah, this is what it is. But experience, you gain experience over time. And then you start to realize, oh, okay, this is when powdery mildew tends to hit these things. And then you also are like, this is not powdery mildew. I've never seen anything like this before. And then you start to get to the point like Alexis, where you and the pathologists are really down this rabbit hole where they're like kind of excited when the plant gets sick because it's like something weird and unique,
something novel or different.
Like, I haven't seen this year at all, or I haven't seen this in 10 years. And you're like, okay. I mean, so yeah, I think that like that learning process for identifying diseases and how to intervene and all that stuff is an important part of being a horticulturist and being a gardener and just a curious
plant
person.
lover, a plant person, a true leaf, one might say.
You got it. Well, I think we did a pretty good ep here.
Well, yeah, we hope you guys liked it. If you have any other questions, or maybe you want to know about some of the publications that, we've kind of referenced that can be helpful, we've got some really great, I love our like IPM guides on tomatoes. So it's like all the different things with colored pictures. And if it looks sort of like this, it's probably this, and can help you do a little bit of that investigation, being the garden detective before you head to the agent to hopefully confirm your suspicions. If not, definitely teach you something new. So we are so glad you guys were here with us today. So reminder, we have a new email address. So that's hortculturepodcast@gmail.com. And so that's hopefully to keep us in the loop with the emails a little bit better, because our normal emails get cluttered. So we are hoping to make sure we're not missing anything. You can also follow us on Instagram at the same handle at Hort Culture Podcast. And we'd love to hear from you. Any ideas? Was this helpful? Do you have specific questions? Definitely let us know. But we hope that as we grow this podcast, you will grow with us and that you have a great one. See ya.